Today's speaker, out of all the speakers we've had over the last 13 years, this one is probably a little bit more special to me, simply because Mr. Young is somebody who I have known as of this year 40 years.
That's hard to believe, but yeah.
Yes.
I'm not that old, am I?
When I was talking about Martin the other day in class, I said, Martin has known me longer than any other friend, and so somebody popped off, so 80 years.
Oh,
Which, since you're
who was that? Who was that?
So Martin and I have known each other a long time, and a little bit of background. So he went to Carson-Newman University, which is Baptist affiliated, very similar in many aspects to Texas Lutheran. Martin was a football player, so he has that in common with a lot of you playing athletics, and is also a graduate of the Harvard Executive Education Program too, through Young Presidents Organization. And Martin has just done incredibly well, but I'll share two stories from my childhood that I think kind of helped set the stage. One of them was that I met Martin when I was 15. He was 7 years older. It was his first job with Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I realized very quickly there was a huge benefit to having the right mentors and people that had experience. For Martin being 7 years older than me, it was like learning things 7 years in advance. When you are 15 years old, that comes in very, very handy, because being in high school, you don't really know which way is up, and it was very nice to have kind of good guidance for a lot of things. Growing up on the border, there was plenty of opportunity to get in trouble, and probably Martin saved me from getting in a little bit of that trouble. The second thing, I'll never forget, the night before I came to Texas Lutheran as a freshman, Martin won't remember this, but we were eating dinner at Red Lobster in El Paso, and I think Martin knew that I was a little anxious, a little stressed out about college, and he said, "Don't worry about it." He said, once you get out into the working world, your employer is going to teach you what you really need to know to excel in that industry. The reason you go to college is to learn how to learn. The reason you are here is to be as multidimensional as possible, to learn philosophy, to learn art, to learn education and communications and business and science, to learn as many things as you possibly can, because that will make you more dynamic in the workforce and much more successful, and also much more interesting. So I'm really happy to have Martin here today. I know that you guys are going to ask a lot of great questions, and it's going to be a very fantastic dialogue and interdynamic. So instead of me talking, why don't we help welcome Martin?
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I didn't get the memo, obviously, on clothes. I assumed that y'all would kind of be casual, so I figured I'd lose the tie and I would be casual. So sorry about that. Normally I am in coat and tie. On Fridays I do kind of slouch a little bit. I kind of go blue jeans a little. This is a kind of a separate topic, but if y'all want to touch on this, with all the work from home stuff, our industry had not been a very big work from home industry. I had never ever worked from home, and I'd never had a home office. So with COVID, we sent 600 of our employees home out of the Texas operation that I run, and we sent like 14,000 of our employees home across Canada and the United States, all in just like a day or two, and we really weren't prepared to do that. And so we can talk about that, but what's interesting is trying to get everyone back in the office has been the hard part. Getting them out actually ended up being the easy part. Now getting them to want to come back is a whole different thing. So the workforce these days is way different than just 2 years ago. So we can park that topic if you want to return to that. It's been a real interesting topic for me. So let me just start off. I'll give you, I saved you from death by PowerPoint. I do a lot of presentations with clients and prospective agencies, and I'm so done with PowerPoint and things like that. So I figure what I would do, I'd really prefer to give you just a little quick overview of me, and then just have a conversation with y'all and see what you're interested in wanting to talk about. I had a really nice lunch with some of you guys here, and I enjoyed that. And so they had some great questions, and I asked them some questions. So hopefully we can all do that as a group. So just a little bit about myself. I was actually born in Dallas, and I wandered out to El Paso when I was 22, which is the time I met Dave. So went out to El Paso. My parents had moved out there. My dad was a college football coach. And so I had never been there. You know, basically if you're in the I-35 corridor, you really don't go past Midland. And so I had never been past Midland. And the only reason I went there was I have an aunt that lived there. And so my mom and dad went out there. I was in East Tennessee at the time in the university. I was a senior. And my dad calls up, and kind of a typical, you know, as the son of a football coach, you always moved like right in November. That used to be the time that you moved. Now it's actually moved up a little bit with the transfer portal and all the garbage that goes on these days. And so Dad called me and goes, hey, Mom and I are moving to El Paso. And I'm going, what? What are you doing out there? He goes, oh, I'm going to be the new head coach at UTEP. So I just wanted you to let you know when you come home Christmas, don't go to Canyon. So at that point, he was the head coach at West Texas State. He had been at Baylor before that as offensive coordinator, and then before that, he'd been a high school coach in Dallas. And so he goes, you need to come to El Paso. I'm not going, okay, I'll look up flights, you know, from Knoxville, Tennessee to El Paso. I'm thinking, that's going to be interesting. Knoxville's a great city. University of Tennessee's there. Right outside of Knoxville was a little school I went to, which is probably not dissimilar to your experience here. An amazing experience for me. Our school is about 2,600 students. We've got a lot of athletes in the school. Historically, perennial national champions 7 times. I missed it by 1 year. I always say in my class, we teed up the next year for those guys to get it, and we didn't get it. We got beat in the playoffs by Elon College. Now it's Elon University. And so I looked it up and I thought, wow, El Paso's a long way away. And it was. And it was a long way away in almost every manner imaginable. I remember I flew out there. My dad was busy recruiting student athletes, so he sent a graduate assistant guy to pick me up at the airport. This guy picks me up at the airport. And if you haven't been to El Paso, and a couple of y'all here have, when you come down at night out of the airport, you see the valley between El Paso and Ciudad Juarez, and you just see lights everywhere. Mainly what you're seeing is the lights in Juarez, and if you look back kind of east, you see East El Paso, and you see this mountain with this big lit star on it. And so I'm thinking, wow, this is pretty cool. Because I'd been in the Smoky Mountains, I'm thinking this is going to really be really pretty. I wake up the next morning, I look outside, and it's like dirt. No tree anywhere. I mean, it's like dirt, rocks. And so I'm not going, what the crap, man? I felt like I had crash landed on the moon. So that was my introduction to El Paso. Fast forward it ended up being amazing. As Dave mentioned, we met through a church ministry, parachurch ministry called Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I had graduated from school, didn't really know what I wanted to do yet. I thought I wanted to do college athletics. And then I thought, no, I want to do professional athletics. And I decided not to do that. And then I didn't know what to do. I was kind of in a funk. And so my dad said, hey, there's this young insurance executive in town. I'm going to introduce you to him. His name's D. Margot. So I met D, and D was probably about 9 years older than me and looked really successful. And so D said, hey, what are you going to do when you get out of school? I'm going, I don't know. And he said, well, you were involved in FCA in college. And I said, yeah. And he said, I know your dad's involved. He said, you want to help me set up the local chapter? And I said, sure. So we did. We set up a really cool local chapter. Coach Landry, Tom Landry of the Cowboys at the time, came down, did my benefit dinner because he and my dad were friends. And so we raised my whole support that night because you have to raise your own money to get paid. So Coach Landry helped me raise the money. We set it up. I got to be really good friends with Dee. And so I had told everyone, I said, look, I know I'm not really called full time to the ministry, but I want to go use my business degree. And so Dee had said, why don't you come work for me and do insurance? Well, first off, insurance sounded like awful. I'm thinking, I don't think so, because that is the most boring sounding thing. Because in my mind, I'm thinking the guy that comes to your house at night and he's got a tie on that's that long and he's trying to sell your parents like life insurance over the kitchen table. That was in my mind. I'm thinking, no, there's no way. And then secondly, I wasn't sure about El Paso. I wasn't sure if I wanted to live there because it was so different than anything I'd ever done. I'm not thinking, I don't know if I want to be out here. I think I'd rather be back where there's trees. So I said, I'm going to go back to Dallas-Fort Worth. So Dee kept after me. I decided to try it out. I went out there. He said, just come out here and drive around with me for a week. Watch what we do, see our client interactions, see the types of things we do. And so I did, and I really thought, this is cool. I like this. And we can park that, and I'll tell you why it's cool in a minute. So I started with Dee, and the first thing I had to do is learn how to file. Back in those days, paper files. No one had a computer on their desk. There were no cell phones. There were no fax machines. Basically, telex, and that was about it. So we communicated with London through telephone, telex. And, so I'm all these paper files. I'm learning how to file. And so I'm working for these people. I worked for a couple ladies in personal insurance, and so they taught me how to rate manually, how you rate up a homeowner's policy, how do you rate up an auto policy. So you had to learn all that stuff manually. And so that was kind of how I started the business. And so then I'm thinking, I think I made a mistake. I made my decision very immaturely based on the fact that Dee had a big house, he had a great BMW, a nice Porsche, and he went to the country club a lot. I screwed up. Something's wrong with this picture. And so that was one of my first lessons, which is, you know what? It doesn't matter how smart you are or what your background is. You got to put in the time if you really are interested in being any good at something. And that's one of the things I learned. And I'll tell you, a huge thing, and Dave mentioned it, is the thing I didn't realize when I made the decision to go with Dee is I was going to get a mentor in the deal. Dee was determined to make me successful. I was the first trainee they had. He thought he could make a trainee, but who knew? They'd never done it. It's kind of expensive because you're hiring someone. It takes about 3 to 5 years for someone to get good at the business. So, basically he's got 3 to 5 years of sunk cost in me. And then if I'm not any good, he's got to get rid of me, and he's got that sunk cost still sitting there. So it ended up being an amazing ride for me. So from that point, by the time I hit about 26, 27, he already had conversations about becoming an owner in the company. And then when I got about 28, we worked out a stock arrangement, and we worked out a buy-sell arrangement where me and 2 other guys would commit to buy him out over a period of about 20 years. And so we worked all that out and set out to do that. And there's a lot in between there. A lot in between there. A lot of near-miss things, a lot of stupid mistakes you make in business. And we can come back and you can ask me those questions if you want in a minute. So you'll find I park things a little bit, and I'll let you decide what you want to go back to. So we'll park that one. But my time at JDW Insurance was the name of our firm. Was nothing just short of amazing. So what we are, in case y'all aren't familiar, as an agent or a broker is what we were. So we didn't assume any risk. We took no financial risk at all. An insurance company did that. So on the commercial insurance front, the vast majority of insurers do not have a selling force. They contract with people like us. And then we go out and we sell and rep their products. So it's like a manufacturer's rep of any particular item. This just happens to be commercial insurance. We also do high net worth personal insurance. So we do a lot of rich people's toys, their houses. And we have one client that literally he's got something like 48 residences scattered all over the world. I don't know how you get to 48 residences. I know he's got a G65. That's probably how he gets there, but how he gets to all of them, I don't know. But the guy collects, he's a serial house collector. So we have people like that. We do a lot of sports figures because they have a lot of toys and stuff too. We do health insurance through businesses primarily. We do some small stuff too. And then our most recent thing is financial retirement, RPW, wealth and financial retirement stuff. We do 401ks now. We've been buying up wealth management companies. We've got a guy that we got from Lincoln Financial and one we picked up from Raymond James. And so we're doing some interesting things now. So you dial it forward to 2012, we were looking at our operation and the amount of money that it was taking to hire young people to come into the business, and the amount of money that we were having to make in terms of cash to throw off money to young shareholders to pay their notes was going to start fighting somewhere in about 5 to 8 years from that point. And so we started thinking, you know, what should we do with this? We'd become pretty successful. We were owning the region out in El Paso. We had about 85 employees in our agency, which is a big agency. We were doing really well. So between really Dallas and Phoenix, it was kind of our space. Now there's a lot of empty space, but it was still our empty space. And so we had to make a decision, you know, do we want to keep going with this? Or do we need to, right now, this is as good as we're going to probably look. We were all pretty young, and we had a whole host of people under the age of 30 that were very successful, and we had really high growth years, and then our EBITDA was really strong. So even though we were basically owned by 4 people, we ran the firm like a publicly traded firm in that, you know, the EBITDA was important. We didn't run any of our stuff through their cars or country club memberships or any of that stuff. We kept it, you know, clean like a business. And so we decided to kick the tire in the marketplace. And first call was from a company called Marsh Agencies, MMA. And then Hub, which is who we ended up going with, called us. And then the next one was a company called Gallagher, based in Chicago. Also, Hub is in Chicago. And so I went off to a trip to London with some clients, and while I'm over there, you know, we had spent a bunch of time with them while I'm over there. They gave us our initial indications of what they would want to pay for the firm. And all of a sudden, my CFO calls and he says, "Hey, Martin, we got stuff coming back in. You're going to want to look at this." Because I had been really kind of like, "Nah, I don't want to do this. I don't want to sell out. I mean, this is our baby. We've been, you know, we built it to this point, and no, we're not going to sell out." So John says, "You're going to want to look at this." And so I said, "Well, just give me a preview because it's late here. I just got through taking some people to the theater, and I was tired, and I had to be up and down in the market by 7. So I said, "Just give me the synopsis." And so he said, well, he gave me 3 numbers. And those were 3 different offers from 3 different carriers. And I said, "Are you kidding me?" I said something else, but I said, "Are you kidding me?" And John goes, "No. And in fact, we've got one more that's going to be better than those 3. So all of a sudden, it's kind of like, well, this is kind of real now. We got to decide, are we going to sell the company or not? So we did decide to sell the company. And we can park that issue, and I can tell you why. And then within just a few months of us selling the company, the corporate CEO out of Chicago called me and said, "Hey, I want to come to El Paso." And I'm thinking he's wanting to come down just to see what he bought, because he hadn't been down there. The M&A team had been down. And so Marty shows up, and he's really a cool guy. Our firm, Hub International, who I sold to, is only 22 years old, and we're now the 5th largest broker in the world. So in the last 22 years, that company went from 0 to number 5 in the world, which is an amazing feat. And Marty had been the CEO driving all that growth. So I'm thinking he's coming down to kind of check out what he bought, and how, you know. So I had planned all this stuff, and I had newspaper people ready to go, and I was running them all over town and meeting our largest clients and taking them to dinners and all that garbage. And he pulls me aside and he goes, "I need to have 5 minutes of your time with no one else with us, please." So I'm not going, "Okay." So then that's when he said, "Hey, I want you to move to Dallas. I want you to run the Texas operation." And I'm going, "Marty, I got a junior in high school and a freshman in high school. Those 2 girls are going to kill me. They've never lived anywhere but El Paso. They don't want to go." He goes, "Oh, no, they'll love Dallas. They'll love Dallas." And I said, "Man, my parents are 80. They're turning 80, and we're the primary caregivers, and we're their help." "Oh, no, you just take them with you." I said, "Okay." And then I go, "But Marty, we've got an earnout, a 3-year earnout, and I'm only 5 months into the earnout, and there's like $10 million at risk in that earnout." And I'm like going, I want the $10 million. And he's like, "Oh, it's going to be fine. You know, that operation's going to report to you. You can look over his shoulder and make sure that you pick who you want." And we moved. And it's been an amazing ride. And you know what? Marty was right about all those things. So park that. So now you got all these things parked over here. So that's just kind of been in a snippet. So where I am today is I'm in a different capacity in that in my shop in El Paso, I actually sold and brokered business and hustled accounts, and then I'd take that hat off and I'd put a hat on that I'm the local CEO, and then I'd take that hat off and put this hat on, and then I was running sales management with the other salespeople, and then take that hat off, and then you had to be dad and husband, and then you have to go out, and El Paso is a very people-centric town, so you had to go out and network, and so you could sell more business. So now what I do is totally different. I've got 600 people in the operation, and we've got 12 locations, and so I've got the retail operations of those 12 locations, and then I do M&A for Texas. So that's my role now. So it's really different than what I did in El Paso, but incredibly fun. So that's kind of my little story really quick. So now let's park those things, and let me do this. I would rather, if we could, I don't know what's on your mind, what you're interested in knowing. And we can touch on any number of different things. So what I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, your game for this, is let me stop and let you ask some questions, and let's just see where the questions take us. And then and feel free, there's not a question that I won't try to do my best answer, and if I don't know it, I'll tell you that. And if it's something you just want an opinion on, I'll tell you that too. But let's just stop real quick and see, where would y'all like to go with the balance of our time here? Yeah.
So you mentioned that employees are now working from home, and now it's a bit harder to get them back to the office. As like their boss, would you say that they've been more or less efficient working at home?
That's a good question. Up front, I think everyone was pretty efficient the first probably year. And I think, I'll tell you, here's what I'm thinking, why. I mean, right up front, those of y'all, I mean, unless you're kind of like either in the middle of the fray with a family during the start of the pandemic, or you're running the business and you're trying to figure out what to do, I have to tell you, it was kind of a little bit frightening and unnerving, because you're sitting there as a business owner and an operator, and you're thinking, what's going to happen? Because all of our client base, we are completely reliant on our client base. So if our client base, if they can't work and they can't generate revenue, all of our brokerage fees just go down with it, And we had clients calling us and wanting to say, hey, we've got 1,500 trucks, oil service trucks, and we're going to park all of them right now. And we want you to go back and renegotiate our premiums. So you go back to the insurance company and try to renegotiate premiums, so you have two things happen to you. You're going to lose revenue right now, that stream of income for that year, and then you're going to go back and try to get a reduction and get, for the past premiums from the audit. So you're going to get a double whammy. All that to say that I think no one knew what was happening. So March and April were pretty ugly financially for most companies, and we were no different. It was ugly here. I can tell you, the president's sitting there, and she can tell you, I'm on the board at the school I went to, and I know the conversations we had as a small school that's heavily dependent on tuition. So that's a big deal. So those things were scary. And so up front, I think people really paid attention to what was going on. I think people really worked hard. We made a commitment to our people, all 13,000 of them. We said, hey, we're not going to do any furloughs. We're not going to riff anybody. We're not going to do anything. In exchange, we want you to give up 3% of your pay or your commission. If we don't need that 3%, then we'll turn around and we'll give it back to you. And I don't think they thought we would give it back to them. We got to a point where about in September, we could see that we were pretty stabilized out. We turned around, we retroed everybody back, everything, which it blew everyone's mind, really, because we didn't have to do that, but we did. So I think up front, people were pretty focused on doing the right things. What I'm seeing now, moving into year 2, is they're going to pick up the dog or do something with the kids, and all of a sudden their 8 to 5 day is now 8 to 8 or 8 to 9 in some cases, because we're seeing the email traffic and you see when things are happening. And so everyone's days have kind of gotten longer. We're starting to see errors and omissions pop up, actually some pretty large ones, where our people didn't take care of something they should have. So moving into year 2, I'm not going to say we weren't really productive in year 1, but in year 2, it's sloppier and it's harder. What's hard for us, besides that, is that we're very acquisitive. So we're always buying companies, and it's hard to integrate a company when you're not putting everyone together and they're not seeing people in the operation. It's hard to train people remotely. It just doesn't flow the same way. I had to terminate someone via Zoom during the pandemic for cause, and that's a weird thing. I'm accustomed to sitting in a room with someone and talking about it and not looking at someone on the screen saying, hey, dude, this ain't working. So long answer to your question, but I think most people have gotten really comfortable with being at home. They like it, especially in a big cities, our big city markets like Dallas and Houston, where people are driving 50 miles, one way, and they don't want to do that. If they can sit at home, they'd like to do that. We find that we're not going to give up our offices, so the challenging part is most businesses are trying to figure out how do you take the workforce, that the genie's out of the bottle, so it's not ever going to go back in the bottle in my mind. So we know we're going to be a hybrid workforce, so then how do we take that hybrid workforce and what do we do with that? And then how do you create high functioning teams like we had when we were all together in a hybrid workforce? So like today at lunch when I was talking with you guys, one of the things that popped up is those shared experiences and working with one another. Okay, think about that. If you weren't working with one another and you were pulled apart and you were all in a vacuum, do you think it would be the same? It's not. And that's the problem we have. And that's the problem every business has right now. So it's really challenging. I tell you, one of the hardest jobs you got right now, because I know what our president has to do, and it's really difficult, especially during the beginning of COVID when you're trying to do all the right things to keep the student body safe and keep your professors and your staff safe, and then how do you do that? But then how do you create an experience? Like my youngest graduated from Trinity, and she had a virtual graduation online. That wasn't very satisfying to her, but that was what she got. And one of the big reasons she picked Brown, is where she's doing graduate work right now, besides the fact she got a really nice scholarship, is that they were committed to having people on campus. And they required vaccines, and they had a lot of requirements, and you wear a mask, but that's how they did it. And she said, "Okay, I'm going." Long answer to your question. I'm sorry, I'm kind of verbose, but
yeah. So I'm very curious to know more about your firm is very acquisitive.
Mm-hmm.
And we've done research in the past about Aon, Marsh McLennan,
Mm-hmm.
and they're also highly acquisitive as well. And I just want to know more, like, what's the process like,
Mm-hmm.
and just like the nitty gritty of how everything.
how that works.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It is interesting. It's horribly interesting. We are either the number one or number two most acquisitive every year. So we have our target is about 5% organic growth, and then the rest is acquired growth. We buy about $230, $250 million a year in acquired growth. This last year in Texas, I acquired $57 million in revenue in Texas. So for me, this is what we do within Hub, but for me in particular, the very first thing that's most important is the people. It's a very people-centric business. And so I need to know the people. I need to understand who's there. I need to know, there's the numerical stuff that you have to go through. I mean, all the financial stuff and how you tie that out and everything. And we virtually strip search someone even down to cell phone numbers and what's the serial number on that cell phone. It goes on the list. So I mean, we know everything. We try to know everything about the firm we can. But the biggest thing is the people. So you have to really be able to assess the people, feel good about them, so you have meetings with them. The key people, you want to make sure they're staying because they drive the revenue in a firm like ours. So the production people all drive revenue. So it's really important just to be able to understand that. So it's kind of interesting when you're doing the job. I've got to approach a business owner like I was approached, and then I've got to really try to get to know them and say, hey, express interest. We'd really like to, if you ever decide that you want to do something different, we'd like for you to think of us. And my approach is always probably low pressure. I don't like high pressure salespeople. Although I sold my whole career, I don't like people that get in my face and are high pressure salespeople. So, I'll usually say, I'd like to at least just meet you, and then I know you maybe are doing your thing, but there might be a time when that changes, and it changed for me. And I'll usually, I can share with them, it changed for me, and here's what happened, and this is what we did. So the people part is the most important. If you get the right people, they drive the revenue. So when you value the company, we do it on a basis of EBITDA. And so it's so many times EBITDA. And then we try to buy across the platform, we try to average our buys at about between 10 and 11 times EBITDA. And then we will sell ourselves typically, because we are private equity owned, we will sell ourselves typically usually anywhere between 14 and 16 times EBITDA. So the arbitrage obviously is where we make our money on the stock and how the company goes. So when you're looking at someone's business, if you're prepaying the EBITDA and you're going to pay 10 to 12 times EBITDA, that's typically, there's going to be like 8 years roughly of EBITDA you're prepaying for, so to speak. So what you have to be able to figure out is, can you take what you're buying and can you continue to make it grow at 5% or 10% or what percent a year in order to be able to make sure it is a functioning business, number one. But the other thing, you've got the arbitrage of what did you pay for it. When we sell, what are we going to get off of it? And so that's kind of an interesting thing. So you're trying to figure that in there, and then trying to average something out across a huge platform is kind of tricky. So I did one this year where we had to pay 14 times to get the company. And I did a couple others that we paid 10 or 12 times to get the company. And so the differences between those companies are the management structure, the people, the ages that they are in. I like to see stratification of ages. I don't want everyone to be, if everyone's like 60 and getting ready to retire, that's really not a good buy for us, because as soon as we give them the big check, they're going to be gone. So you really want some that you got a group of 60, 50, 40, 30s, and some 20s. And it'd be ideal to have one or two out of college. So you're looking for stratification. You're looking for an ability to perpetuate internally. So people that have perpetuated, and when I mean perpetuate, that means they brought in younger producers and they're selling their stock to that younger producers, and it's been successful. That's a big deal. You're looking for position in the community, and you really have to have a cultural fit with your organization. And I can't stress that enough. So if you take someone that doesn't fit your organization, it just doesn't work, and you end up having a train wreck. So you've got to find people that have a shared common vision. So it's kind of interesting. You become almost like a business consultant, where you're looking at all aspects of the business, and your team is made up of, like myself, I'll be the team lead. Our CFO, he puts all the numbers together and works with our M&A team. I told you we did about 230 million in acquired revenue. We only have 6 people in the corporate office that they do M&A. So everything else gets done in the field. So I've got a COO, our chief operations officer, that works on just the operations piece with the CFO. And then we've got a chief sales officer that helps me kind of cull through the salespeople, have meetings with them to see what we got, And again, you're trying to have a meeting, if you can imagine this, you're sitting in a room, they know they're selling, so they're trying to position themselves. They're looking at you like, do I even want to work for you? And I'm looking at them like, do I even want you to work for me? And so there's this whole thing going on where you're trying to make really good decisions, and it's not really easy. And you're getting ready to stroke a $90 million check or an 80. I mean, the smallest deal we did this year in Texas was it was a $55 million deal up front, and then with the follow-on earn-out, they could get another, $15 million. So they had a path to $65 million with all the stuff. And so there's the element, it's more art than science. And as long as you're good with that, most of the people that are the best with that are a little bit more flexible in how they approach people. But that's the long and the short of kind of how that M&A works. It's the numbers are important because it gives us an idea of what we want to pay and kind of the ranges we want to be in. But what's the most important, or the asset, is the people.
Would you say that, for your business in particular, scale is probably the most important? That's why you guys are acquiring so many businesses?
Well, no, you know what? While we're acquiring them, is our model, we're private equity owned. So the difference between a PE-backed company in basic terms versus a stock-held company, the stock-held guys, they have to really be responsive, quarter on quarter to earnings. We don't. If we want to step back one quarter, we step back. And if we want to reinvest in something else, we don't have to worry about what the market's going to do to our stock. We're not going to get our guts kicked out for doing something. Someone's not going to be overlooking our CEO all the time, and he isn't going to be overlooking me all the time saying, "What are y'all doing in Texas, you idiot?" So what we find is on a PE-backed company, you got your sponsor, and so obviously you have to live with your sponsor. And so, basically you set out a pro forma and you set out a path to get to a certain point. And so you're executing on different metrics. Now, when you're also in the PE-backed world, you have more leverage. So you've got most PE-backed firms trade anywhere between 6 to 7 times leverage. We're on the lower end of that. We trade at about 6 times. So whereas the stock-held companies, Marsh in our world, Aon, they're both stock-held, Gallagher, they typically don't grow as rapidly as we grow because their earnings, they can't go out and just spend a wad of money every year buying stuff because it upends their earnings. And so their growth is really different than ours. So, it's kind of really interesting that difference and that dynamic. So that, when you look at it, we're looking at, so we get a PE sponsor. We know that usually 5 or 6 years is when they want to do their deal and they want to exit. They typically raise money in a fund. They put you in that fund and they pull money out of that fund to buy you. And so they've got to close that fund off. Well, our guys right now, they're Hellman & Freeman is our sponsor out of San Francisco, and they like us, and we really like them. So we're in our 8th year with them. And so what they did is they novated us out of an old fund, did a tax-free switch, and put us into a new fund in February of last year. And then we've been doing distributions. And essentially we'll do a distribution with them like this. In December, we did a $2.17 billion distribution. 30% of that goes to people like me as shareholders. I wish it all went to me, but it doesn't. And 70% of that goes to the PE partner. And so they replenish their fund. Then it just gets distributed to all the owners within Hub that have invested in Hub at whatever level we wanted to invest in. And then at that point, they can continue to go down the road with us. So right now, what we're trying to focus on is continuing to stay active with them, and they don't want to sell us off. They'd like to just recycle us, so to speak. So we're recycling by bringing in maybe another PE partner. We brought one in called Altus out of Toronto, Canada, and they bought 25% position in us. But that still means between us and H&F, we control the operation, which is really important. So it's real interesting. The dynamic is real different in PE-backed firms versus, our balance sheets will look more stressed out because of the debt we're carrying, a lot more than the stock-held company, but we'll grow significantly times faster than the stock-held companies.
And has that been, like with low interest rates, has that been kind of like a move to leverage up?
Yes. So what we have done each time when we saw things kind of moving up, we actually relocked and reloaded all of our lines of credit. We redid all of our notes. And so we're basically pushed out 15 years right now on a lot of our long-term debt. We do have some short-term that's pushed out 7 years, but we got some pretty favorable terms. So we're good right now. Because a lot of people will say, well, if interest goes up, doesn't that mess up the PE-backed formula? What it does is it increases our costs, yes. It increases everyone's costs, though. So, really all we do is just what you pay for the asset then becomes a different number. You actually maybe don't pay as much. But right now, there's so much liquidity. Y'all probably talked about this a lot. There's so much liquidity in the marketplace right now. You got people looking for places to put money. It's almost silly. So, when Hub first became a PE-backed brokerage, we were the first ones. Dial it 22 years forward, there's probably 60 or 70 PE-backed agency brokerages right now in the top 100. It's crazy. But the fastest growing ones are us.
First off, thank you so much for coming. But I wanted to ask you, so just from the business perspective, a lot of successful people you talk to had so many failures before they sorry, before they reach success. So I'm curious to see what your opinion is on, like, how do you know when you just haven't, taken the time to try versus throwing in the towel? So some people, it takes them 12 times to get their business started. Some people it takes them 1. So how do you know when it's a bad business idea, or you just need to try that 15, 16 time?
That's a good question. This might sound oversimplistic, but a lot of how you know is how deep your pockets are. I mean, if you have no wherewithal, you maybe can only try that one time. Unless you can pitch your idea to someone else and you either use venture capital or angel investor or someone else. So much of it really is anymore, how much money do you have access to and how long can you burn the cash? And, if you look at like Amazon, for example, for those of y'all that are older like Dave and I, we can tell you that when Amazon first came out, Bezos, they didn't make money for stinking 10 years. I think it was about 10 years, wasn't it? And so during that 10 years, Bezos kept telling the Wall Street, he kept saying, yeah, but we've got this many new customers. And so really Amazon and Netflix and I can't remember the other one. There were like 3 of them that started off that big subscription thing where what they sold people on was the fact, don't worry about the fact that we don't have any net income, that we're actually losing our rear ends. But what you need to focus on is the fact that we've got all these new people we're adding as subscribers and Amazon Prime and Netflix is all these people. And it will translate into revenue at this point. So, in a case like that, people hung with Bezos for years, because they saw he had a model that it made sense. So, I don't know. I think, like everyone, our failure, because everyone has them. There's not anyone alive that I can imagine that would get up here and say that they never made a mistake and never had a failure. I just can't imagine that. Because everyone, you do, that's just the way life is. And so for us, at a very young point, back in the late 80s, we leveraged up our business because Texas Commerce Bank came and said, oh, we'll give you this much money, why don't you all go buy some businesses? And so we thought we were all real smart, so we went out and bought a couple of businesses, and all of a sudden things happened in the marketplace and the pro forma didn't pan out because we didn't have revenue we thought we had, and all of a sudden we were in a world of hurt. And next thing we know, Texas Commerce sells to, Chase, and now all of a sudden Chase is coming in and re-underwriting the book, and Chase is looking at our loan and saying, we don't like this. We're going to call the loan unless you can get some more collateral, and we didn't have any more collateral. We had pulled all our pockets out and they had everything. So it was a really scary time for us. None of us, I was in my late 20s. And my, D, the guy I mentioned to you, my partner, he was just 9 years older than me, so he was probably mid to late 30s. We weren't very old, and people were telling us, you're going to have to go bankrupt. So, but, so that, in that case, we were determined, no, we're not going to go bankrupt. We'll just figure out a way to sell our way out of it. And we all worked like dogs trying to sell more stuff and run the operation as lean as we could run it. And we made it. We burned the note, and honestly, you know what? I was debt averse ever since. I've been very debt averse ever since. But it was a little bit close for me. So, my view of, now debt's a good tool. We're using it very effectively at Hub in the PE-backed model, but when it's, I was on the hook for several $1 million, and it's like my wife was looking at me like, are you an idiot or what? And she really didn't like it. And I was starting to get a little scared too. So that's a hard one, but I think it goes back to, how much money, how much cash can you lose? I think the other thing too is that sometimes, I learned this through one of my professors at school, a guy named Bill Solomon. And Bill talked about the hardest thing to do is to know what not to do. Have the discipline to not do something. And because when you're sitting there, everything, when you look at it, looks pretty good on paper and all these green blue skies and green pastures. But the discipline to know what not to do is the hardest thing a business person does or an entrepreneur does. And I think he's right. And so for me, and when I heard that in class one day, I was sitting there thinking about it, and he had just brought in a Segway. This was a long time ago before Segway was out. And that was his example. He rode the Segway into class, knocked over the podium, and pulls it up there and is doing this number, and everyone's like going, "Ooh, that's pretty cool. What is that?" He said, "This is the example of knowing what not to do. We didn't know not to do this, and now the company's broke." I was a shareholder in the company. One of his students, it was the student's idea. Now they ended up, after it went bankrupt, they salvaged some of the components in it, and they repositioned it. It actually was supposed to be a wheelchair for people, and not what you see as the Paul Blart Mall Cop thing. It was actually supposed to be a wheelchair where handicapped people could go up and down stairs and maneuver without. It couldn't become that because the wheelchairs cost like $25,000 and no one could afford them. So, long answer to your question, I think it has to do with capital, but also discipline of knowing what not to do. Sometimes it might be one time, might be twice. A good friend of mine that we were just talking about in El Paso named Paul Foster. Paul took a bankrupt refinery. He timed it just right, and he turned it around and he became a billionaire off it. So you have things like that happens. Now, how many times do you see that happen to people? Not that often. I mean, you see it occasionally. Bill Gates, it happened to him when he got Microsoft and tried to do something with us. In Albuquerque, New Mexico was where that started. And then, you see a Michael Dell who did it out of his dorm room at UT and quit school. But there's kind of a handful of those. But I think if you're looking at the efficacy of the idea and really focusing on the things around it, and then you can make a decision off of knowing whether that's the right thing to do or not. I don't know if I answered that question very well.
You mentioned making a lot of mistakes in business.
Oh, yeah.
I'd say some of the biggest mistakes.
I think the biggest mistake, I was young. I'm gonna blame it on I was young. I think the biggest mistake is not fully counting the cost appropriately. I'm a very naturally optimistic guy anyway. And so I always looked at the glass always being, not half empty, but half full. And there were times when I didn't count the cost correctly, and I should have done that, and that should always be computed into the pro forma. So that's a lack of discipline in a way to not fully count the cost appropriately. Because what happens then when something comes up, and it does come up, then you're not prepared for it. It's like the bank getting all sideways with us. We wanted to buy those other two businesses so bad, we overlooked some true cost. We overlooked part of the fact that in that pro forma was $1 million in revenue from an insurance company that we were going to get from doing services for them, and that insurance company was teetering at the time. And what ended up happening is they became insolvent, and then we didn't have that money coming into pro forma. That was a cost we overlooked. Yeah.
So you were talking a lot about like the different hats you wear. So what's kind of like the main thing you do to kind of like sort of balance all of those different commitments you have?
I walk outside and I scream real loud and come back in. No, you know what? Okay. So you're asking a person, this falls in the personal question. So I'm going to give you a personal answer, and it might be something some of y'all don't like or some of you do like. So answer to the question for me is, I start my day off knowing that my sense of self-worth is created outside of the business, outside of what I do with other people. So my sense of self-worth is really created in a position of where I know I am with a higher power. So that's my perception of how I start my day out. So for me, I can balance the day out, and I don't get overly torqued about certain areas because I know if I stay focused in the right manner, I'll be fine. I might get hit, yes, and it might not be perfect, yes, but I'm going to be fine. So for me, it's the ability for me to be fresh. And a lot of people allow things outside of their life to dictate how they feel about themselves. And I see that a lot, especially with younger people. I have 2 daughters in y'all's age range. As y'all heard, one of them is 23 and she's in graduate school. The other's 25 and she's married now and out. She went to TCU. And so both girls are really smart. And, you know, I've seen like with the kids, they have a hard time separating the fact that just because something's happening externally against them doesn't mean that they're a bad person, or doesn't mean that something's happening. I mean, it's been hard for them to separate that out. So for me, I try really hard to separate that out. So like when I go home, if I've had a tough day at the office, I don't go home and kick the cat and hit the dog and tell my wife, you know, really, because I know my sense of self-worth is generated somewhere else. So I think that's a really important thing. So that's, you know, from a personal perspective, that's how I have to look at it. Hold on, come back to you. You've been really patient, Santi, sorry. And then I'll come back to you too. So go ahead.
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah, you.
Yeah. So,
Chihuahua.
I think, the Mexicans are connecting for this question.
Okay, the Mexicans are connecting?
Yeah, so it's
So I do a lot, I did in El Paso, I did a lot of work in Chihuahua, so that's why I have an affinity for Santi, because
yes.
some of my very best friends are Chihuahuas. Location. Go ahead.
So like I mentioned, it's kind of going off of what Luis had asked earlier. It's more about how you acquire businesses. My question is more about how you integrate them.
That's hard.
Because, like you mentioned, you have a very unique business in the fact that the core of it is probably more brokerage than anything. But then, like we did some research and we find out, okay, you acquire other insurance companies, but all their financial advice.
Yep.
In companies as well. So I was kind of confused as to how you take that and integrate them into the insurance brokerage. And then just kind of a follow-up to Luis's question, whenever you said that you paid around 10 to 12 times EBITDA for a business, do you ever factor in the company's future growth rate into what multiple you pay for a business?
Yeah. We do. So let me do that one first, because that one might be the easiest. Yes, we do. So when we build our pro formas and we build what we want to pay for it, we look at historical revenue, historical sales. Net new is a big thing for us, which is all that means is new business production minus lost business. That gives you a true net new. So you get an idea of, are they actually a sales operation moving forward in growth mode? Or are they just losing money, or did they just get lucky with one good year? So we look at net new. It helps us a lot. Of course, you look at new business and renewal, and so then you factor in, a certain growth pattern. We know that years 1 through 4 during the earnout period, they may or may not hit our EBITDA target that we hit, or they may not, hit certain metrics. But we have a path to get them there. We typically will not, I'll shy away from, if, like for example in Texas, our operation runs about a 34 EBITDA across the board. Some of it's 42, some of it's 26. Strangely enough, it's the financial side, the RPW side, that's the 26 usually, which is an interesting thing. The property and casualty side usually runs, 36 to 38. Employee benefits used to run, at a different, much higher, but now it's lower because of expense loads. But all that to say is when you're looking at the EBITDA, we'll factor all that in creating the models, and it becomes an important factor that we say, okay, if someone's already running at a 34, I don't know that I want to buy. I got to look pretty hard at it. I'd rather buy someone at 29 and then be able to do a little work on their financials and their P&L. To get them up, because then we can create more value. You pay a little bit less money. So there's that element of, how do you help in the value creation, and what are you doing with that value creation? And so I don't want to buy a bad business at all, but I don't mind buying a business that is a little bloated, and I can see where the bloat is, and then I can go back through and pull out the bloat. And then it's more accretive to us. So according to GAAP, accounting, like year 1, we can't we can't count new businesses for the first 12 months in our organic growth, which is another big metric that we look at. We try to make sure we have organic growth. So remind me of the first question that I dodged.
So, and whenever you're talking about the 24 to the 36, you're talking about the margin, right? Like EBITDA margin.
Yeah, EBITDA margin. Yeah.
No, in the first part of the business.
Integration.
Integration. Like,
Yeah.
how do you look at what business you want to integrate into other national?
Yeah.
How does that work as well?
Integration's the hardest thing. And you got to do it right, because you want to integrate them as soon as you can, because you want cross-sell. So for example, recently we purchased a business that was primarily employee benefits. And then it was in an area where we had a business that only had commercial property and casualty, but no employee benefits. So it was going to be a pretty nice fit. So you want to integrate them as smoothly and quickly as you can, but you can't do it too fast, because too much change. It's like that book, Who Moved the Cheese? If you try to move the operation too quickly, it freaks everybody out. So the rank and file, usually the people that get the money are okay with change quicker, but the people who don't get any big paychecks, which is all the rank and file, they're really concerned about, do I have a paycheck? Do I still have a place to work? That kind of stuff. So we do a lot of change management around that. So again, it's very art and science, but most of it's art. So you're having to work with people. Think about if someone came in and said, okay, you guys right here, y'all are no more of this, you're gonna be this over here, and we're gonna pull you over here, you're gonna be on a different team, you're gonna wear a different jersey, you're gonna play different positions. And so you have to manage things like that with people. And so a lot of it is communication style. A lot of it is making sure that up front you're not moving things around too much. The other thing is we have earnouts where these businesses can have bonus payments and get paid more money if they run the business at appropriate financial markers that are preset. And so you don't want to mess them up either. So you really up front, I always tell people Dave will tell you this because he knows me, is I'm a simpleton. So I usually work in threes and tell people, hey, don't move. People can't do more than about three things well at any given time within a business. If you see someone that comes in, they got a 40-point plan, run from it, because they can't implement a 40-point plan. They can't even hardly implement 3 points. So businesses that lack focus, I usually run from them, because they can't really. You're better off, again, going back to the answer I gave a while ago, which is knowing what not to do. The simplicity of knowing what not to do and being careful to say, okay, we want these three things here, and move things in increments. So we try to move things incrementally. So the first day that if I bought your business and brought you on board, the first thing I'm not going to do is I'm not going to come in and say, we're going to take you off your current agency management system, which is how you process invoices, and I'll do all that stuff, and we're going to move you ours to immediately. We actually wait 6 months to a year, because we want the people to be able to settle in. I don't want the people to be, having to learn new processes up front and actually put back revenue production. So that integration we actually have an integration team in Hub, Texas, that's all they do. Is that I've got a point person, I've got someone, we like acronyms, so we call this guy the OIL, the Operation and Integration Liaison, ARF. So the OIL, his job is to make sure that we have weekly calls initially, and then bi-weekly down to monthly, and they go through open items and making sure things are smooth and you get them on there. Culture is really hard, because you don't want to screw up their culture, but at the same time you don't want them not to come into your culture. So you have to work with them on creating a new culture, one that gives recognition to where they've come from, but also is a recognition of what ours at Hub Texas looks like. I don't know I know that's a lot of verbiage, but did that help?
Yeah, for sure. If you could, just as a follow-up to that,
Yeah.
how does the financial advice part of the business go with the brokerage part of the business?
We're new at doing that. We've only been doing that about the last 3 years, and we looked at it as a runway opportunity for us. and we were looking at complementary fits. And what we found is, like, typically the human resource person is the focal point for a lot of the retirement 401k stuff, along with the CFO in a business. And that human resource person also is the same person that works on the employee benefits with our people. So we felt like that we were missing an opportunity. We were wanting to have more touches, for lack of better. We wanted more touches with a customer, because we find if we have more, to be blunt, hooks in them, whether it be property and casualty, employee benefits, retirement, if we have more hooks in them, our relationship can be stronger. We can do more for them, but also we're less likely to lose parts of the business to competition, because all of our products and services that we do are all annually renewable. So every 12 months, our clients can change providers. So our value prop has got to be pretty dadgum strong. We have to deliver on our value prop, or else, you have just a churn, and you don't want the churn.
Sure. So I'm very interested in like the daily routine, daily life of successful people, especially people in like managerial roles like yourself.
Mm-hmm.
I was just wondering like how much time on any given day does Martin Young spend in various different activities? Like how much time do you spend in meetings? How much time do you spend reading, thinking by yourself? How much time do you spend like doing strategic planning or things like that?
I spend too much time in meetings, too little time thinking, probably, and not enough time planning strategically, to be honest with you. Now, that was really quick, but I'm and it's a little facetious, but not. What happens is, if you're not careful, so by the time something comes to my desk, it's already screwed up. And that's just a fact of life. So there's 600 people in my operation. Someone is doing something weird sometime, all the time, and by the time I see it, it's usually like really weird. So that can consume your day. So what I've had to do is, in fact, I think I might have mentioned to Hugh at lunch, is I come prepared to work to be interrupted. So I block out a chunk of my day just because I'm going to be interrupted. And it can be weird stuff. Like a really tragic thing happened that I've never had in my career. In December, one of our transportation salespeople murdered his wife, and then started wanting to talk to our employee population. And I'm like going, whoa, first, how can you do that to another human and your wife? And then we have to go into, a damage control mode to how do we protect our employees? What do we need to do? And we're having multiple calls, and we're with the police down in Houston where this happened. And so you'll have something like that that's just totally out of the blue. And then you'll have, or like today at lunch, I had to step away because we have someone that stepped off the reservation and did something they shouldn't have, and the SCC will hang them out to dry. And so I had to let the person go. So that's just a fact of life. So you have to carve out some time for that. What I started doing is, I recognize that at work I really can't think really clearly, because when everyone sees that I'm there, they want to come in because I travel a lot. So I've created an open door policy. I want people to feel comfortable coming in, so I usually leave my door open unless I've got some reason I've got to close it. So given that, I've started doing thinking and stuff off premises. I'll do it at my house. We can do it now. It's just my wife and I and a dog and a cat, that both the dog and cat belong to the kids. That's a whole other story. They shouldn't be there, but they are there. The things you guys do to your parents, you leave your pets. But really, I think what people don't do is spend enough time thinking. And I'll tell you, you got to decompress. It's hard to think clearly and strategically if you're twisted up in knots, and you're always, you're coming from making this decision that's pretty heady to this one over here, and you can't make a clear decision. So the best thing to me as a leader you can do is be in a position to process appropriately and make good decisions. There are more decisions you have to make today than you can ever imagine in business. I mean, Dave will probably echo that. I mean, I've been doing this it'll be 38 years July I've been doing this. in the last probably 3 years, it's been the weirdest I've ever seen in my whole career. I mean, so I thought the weirdest was 08, 09 when you had the Great Recession and that meltdown, but that was just a warm up. And you get into this stuff, really, you have a pandemic, first time in 100 years. You know, you're trying to rush people out of the workplace. You're trying to get them home working safely. You've got to still, be responsive to your clients. I don't know what all these people are going to be doing in their living room with their cat and their dog barking and their kids coming in and out. And I mean, really, what level of service are we going to give our people? How do you manage that? So there's this things like that. And as a leader, you become a little bit more paranoid. Just like, how do I know what people are doing? So you got to rely on other people within the operation. So.
And so you'd say that's another drawback of work from home is just not being able to keep tabs on everybody.
Well, I think the biggest drawback that is a drawback, but the biggest drawback on work from home is the inability to have iron sharpening iron. If you and I are doing a project together and you don't do your side of the bargain, I can call you on that. But when you're at home and I'm at home, I don't know. Yeah, and then the spontaneous, I guess the spontaneous things that happen from collaboration. That's probably the hardest thing. But work from home is, I think, here to stay in some form. So, okay, hang on. This young lady right here, and then I'll be back to you.
So many great questions, Martin. Thank you for taking the time to speak
Yeah.
with us. So, your business, I feel like it's had several moments where it's pivoted and changed directions. When you have one of those pivotal decisions ahead of you, how do you make that decision? Can you kind of walk me through some of your mental processes? Like, what do you go through? Do you have kind of a structured list? Do you have certain mentors you like to go through? So can you kind of walk me through your mental process?
Yeah.
When you have a big decision?
For me, I think the biggest thing for me, again, because the way I process things, I need something to hang. I need something to hang, like a hook, to hang something on. If I can find my hook, then I can start processing pretty rapidly. If I can't find my hook, I struggle. This is just a personal thing. Everyone's different, but for me, it's finding the hook. And so, what I mean by finding the hook, it's like the central thing that I'm gonna create a yes or no tree off of to try to make that decision. And so, a lot of my hooks, they come from different places, but most of my hooks are rooted in things that tie back to a moral compass. Because a lot of the things I have to deal with, separate from just a traditional business decision, is something that someone, by the time it gets to me, it's kind of weird and ugly, and you would not believe some of the things that people do. And so, the only way I can make that hook with fairness and with appropriateness and those things, it's got to be bound up in something that I can feel and see. So that's how I need to find that. When I can't find that, and sometimes I can't, I struggle a little bit, it'll delay a good decision. And I've learned not to rush a decision until I can feel comfortable about it. Because if you rush the decision, it's the wrong choice. It can be really detrimental to the organization. It's because there's ripple effects. So you have to really make sure that you're comfortable with the construct of what how you're just making that decision in. What does it look like? And there today, I don't know how many of y'all, probably not in your class, Dave, but in other classes, you have to have talked about DEI, diversity, inclusion, and all that. That's a new thing. And so, how do you do that properly, and what does that look like? So we have a DEI officer at our firm, and how do we engage appropriately? What does all of that mean? And so there's so many things in business now. The green movement and what happens within the enterprise. Are you ecologically correct or not? And So all of those things, there's a bunch of stuff going on. It's not like it used to be. It used to be you'd go out and you did your job, and your job was you sold insurance or you built a car or you did whatever. But now, and this is if we had someone here in the psychology department or something like this, that this would be interesting a little bit from their perspective. But one of the things we talked a lot about in business school is how things shifted from where morality issues and things like that, the things that you should be taught to do and what not to do and how you treat people, used to occur in the home. And you would see that in the home. And then what happened as the home started to change and you had multi-parent homes and different things happen within homes and things change, then you saw people start pushing a lot of that to schools. You see it in high schools. You see it probably here where they're pushing a lot of things to other people to do jobs that should have been, and now it's being pushed into the business community. And the business community is expected to, I don't know if y'all noticed when a lot of things started happening a couple of years ago, people expected the business community to step in because the business community had economic power. And so that became the next expectation. So you have to be prepared in all of those settings to appropriately arrive at a decision that works for everything.
Yeah,
So it's not, it's kind of tricky. Kind of tricky.
Along those lines, is especially in your business, the relationship with your clients or people you work with is really important, but it's also a business at the end of the day.
Right.
So can you talk about your philosophy and balancing those two things at the same time?
Most of my clients, when I was actively selling as a working broker, ultimately became my friends because that's just the way I like to sell. I'm very relational. And so the people that I spent my time with, I chose them wisely. When I was looking for a client, I wouldn't just pick up their insurance just to make a buck. I tried to choose someone who was well respected for running their business above average, that someone that was respected as a person that was forthright and they didn't make their problems your problem. And if I liked them. If I didn't like them, I wasn't going to work with them. I don't care how much money you're going to pay me, because in the end, in a situation where you're working so closely with someone, if you don't like them, it comes out, and they're going to know that, and it's not going to be a very good situation. So that's kind of how I have always approached that. So it's a very relational business, what we do. If you think about it, we're sitting down with the business owner oftentimes, and the CFO or general counsel, but usually it's the business owner, and we are designing risk management plans for them to protect the one place they have almost, in most cases, all their assets in, is that's their business. So you create a relationship with these people that's far deeper than just someone selling something to them. You actually become a part of their team. You're helping them. You have to understand how they're trying to position their business, what they're trying to do with their financials, and what they're trying to do with the everything in their employee population, and then how can you really help them. So, yes, sir.
Mark, thank you so much for spending the time to speak with us
Yeah.
today. We appreciate it. You mentioned how Hub has a different structure than some of your publicly traded peers, but is there one of those publicly traded peers that you really admire, and if so, why?
That's a good question. The one I really admired, Marsh bought and kind of cannibalized, and that was a company years ago. I really, really liked them. And they did a really nice job in the risk management front. I think out there in the marketplace of the publicly traded guys, they're all so different. Marsh and Aon they're the 800-pound gorillas, and they play at a very, multinational account basis. They decided on the Marsh side, they wanted to get in our space, because we're really a middle market broker. Middle market is 0 to about $2 billion in revenue, typically. It's middle market. Usually up to about 5,000 employees is considered middle market. That's our space. And so Marsh could never really figure out how to do it on their own in their current model, because it just wasn't set up that way. So they actually created a company called MMA, Marsh McLennan Agencies, MMA, that looks kind of like Hub. And so they went out, started buying up people like we had been buying them up. And, I talked to them because they were part of Marsh. So if you said, which one of the ones do I like? I probably like Marsh a little bit better than Aon, just because I think Marsh, they're still trying to really bring broker solutions. Aon's has become just a pretty big conglomerate. A lot of companies, the bigger they get, if you're not careful, it's really hard not to lose the way. And what happens is, instead of really being excellent at delivering the product and service that they used to do to get there, they end up really, especially in the public format, they end up having to really do a lot of things just to make numbers and things like that change the dynamic. So it's an interesting space. I personally hope that we don't ever do an IPO, although we might, who knows, you never can tell. I like our space, and I hope we get to stay private. So, long answer to the question, but hang on. I told you I'd come back to you, and I didn't, and then I'll come back to you.
You talked a lot that is people. There is part of the business of people.
Yeah.
Can you give us some tips on relationship building and also networking skills? Some of the characters that you think are essential to have.
That's a good question. I think relationship building to me, being authenticity, being approachable and interested in people. So for example, the reason I wanted to do the format this way, I want to hear what you're interested in. To me, that's interesting, because I learn from y'all just as much as hopefully you'll walk out here with something. But I learn from you guys too. So to me, that curious George mentality of being curious to say, hey, tell me about yourself. Where are you from? What do you like? What makes you, what gets you excited? That type of thing during the day. What are you interested in? So I think being curious George, and really, you've got to be comfortable putting yourself out. Now, for me, Dave will tell you, because he's known me all these years as I've known him, that I never meet a stranger. And part of that is I just genuinely like people. I really do. I think people are interesting. There's always, some weird ones, and there's always some that are no damn good. But most of the time, the people are pretty interesting, and I actually enjoy them. And I derive a lot of enjoyment in meeting new people. And my mental makeup is that I think that, just like I talked about the stratification in the firm age-wise, I always find it real interesting to have friends that I spend time with that are older than me, and friends that are my age, and people that are younger than me that I spend time with. So for example, a real close friend of mine, I think Dave might remember from El Paso days, was a retired 2-star general named Dick Berenhausen. Dick's 18 years older than me, actually more than that. And I met Dick when he was the head at Fort Bliss, and I was on a chamber deal. I was probably 30. And he was, immediately I just liked him. I thought, this is a cool guy. I mean, he'd been in several tours of duty. He was running this big post. We got to know he and his wife, my wife and I did. And he retired, and he went on to be the CEO at Robert R. McCormick Tribune Foundation in Chicago. And at that time, the Tribune Foundation was the majority shareholder of Tribune Media Company and the Chicago Cubs and WGN and all this stuff. The man was amazing. And so we spent a lot of time purposely with him because I liked him. I learned from him. So conversely, a guy that I spend a lot of time with right now, my best friend in El Paso, his son is 33. His name's Tyler, and Tyler, when he was at SMU, used to come by and see Vicki and I, and he'd hang out with us. And now he's married, and he and his wife, they come hang out and they go to the lake with us, and we ski together. And Tyler's thoroughly interesting. He works for American Funds. He's a data scientist, and I learn all kinds of crap talking to Tyler about data science. And so Vicki and I have this range of people. We enjoy their company. I think that makes for richness in one's personal self. I think to your question on networking, my networking is always focused on being somewhere to be wherever the people are you want to sell into. So, for example, when I first got into business in El Paso, I looked around, I looked at the board rosters to see who were the names on different not-for-profit boards around town, because that's where most people that are successful end up getting on some board, and they contribute money and they get engaged that way in the community. And so right off the bat, it was easy to see that the El Paso Symphony Orchestra had one of the best boards. And so I don't know a thing about symphony music, don't even like it. But I got on that board. I sought some people out and said, hey, I want to get on the board. I've got an idea for fundraising. I think it'll help you guys. And so we created, my contribution was, I didn't know anything about fundraising, but I love sports. So we did a March Madness deal. We sold tables and had big TVs, and we had cigar smoking, and people come in, and we had silent auctions, and we gave the symphony $80,000 afterwards, and they thought I was pretty cool. I didn't know anything about symphony, but I made relationships, and I got to do business with some of those people. So I think networking, it needs to be something that you can look at. I don't think you need to spread yourself too thin. I always tell my people, going back to my rule of threes, no more than 2 to 3 outside and board activities, because you can't do it very well, and the last thing you want to do is get involved in something and be a flop at it. Then they're not going to want to talk to you about what you're trying to sell them or what service you're trying to do, because you screwed up and you really couldn't fulfill the obligation as a volunteer. So I don't know if that's kind of the direction you were wanting.
I just want to know, what skills do you feel like you're bringing to Hub when becoming a local CEO, and how, like, what are the biggest skills you have acquired since then?
That's a good question. You know what? I think the skills I brought to Hub were because we had made some of those dumb mistakes. I was building an organization, and I had kind of seen a lot of the stupid stuff that I saw in the operation I inherited, and I'd already been there and done that, so that was kind of helpful. So that was one of those deals where, you know, your experience really paid off. So I think that was really helpful. The thing that I've learned is I've had to learn how to function in a bigger organization, which is real different. When you're in one where you got 80 people and you every day see them and you can go touch them and talk to them, and it's a heck of a lot easier to manage that than something where you got 600 people and you don't see all those people all the time, and then you go into COVID and you don't see any of those people hardly at all. You know, so I think what I've learned that has been helpful to me is, how do you manage effectively through others? So for me to get something done today, I don't do it. In the old days, I just did it. Today, I would use you to do something. I would use you for something. I'd use Dave for something. And when I say use, I mean, I would say, hey, you're running my Houston operation, or you're running the Dallas operation. Man, we need to do X, Y, and Z. Can we make that happen? And I've got to get buy-in. So I'm accomplishing the goals and objectives. And I think the second part of that is, I've got to be able to cast a vision that's clear enough and simple enough that everyone can understand where we want to move the company. So, yes, sir.
If you could visit one of those parked cars, I would love to know more about the formation of your leadership story. So specifically going back to the FCA days, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, what tools, experiences, memories that you gained there do you have translated into the business world where you are today?
That's a good question. Almost everything. When I started working with the FCA, a couple of things. One thing is, on a personal level, you're challenged to really be clear about your purpose and intent in living. Things just, they don't just happen. So that's one thing. I think the other thing is that when you really have to believe in what you're doing, because you have to go out and raise your pay, because you don't have a paycheck. So I'd have to go sit down with a businessman and say, this is what we're doing. We're building this ministry. It's new to the city. Here's our outcomes. And so I would be pitching a very intangible thing. And so you had to really be able to do that with clarity And everyone I was talking to, I was 22 and they were like my age or, older in some cases. And so I had to be comfortable to sit in the room with them, to look appropriate and, be able to clearly ask someone for a donation. That's kind of a little scary when you're 22 and you're sitting in front of this guy and he's a very successful, actually just getting the appointment with them was a learning experience into itself. I'll never forget the first guy I talked to, someone said, hey, you need to go talk to J.O. Stewart. And I said, okay, I've heard his name, but I don't know him. I said, what does he do? Well, he has a trash company, El Paso Disposal. He does trash. I'm thinking to myself, well, that doesn't sound very sexy, but okay. So this guy says, here, call J.O. So I called J.O. And J.O. at the time was probably, I don't know, probably 55 or so, and I'm 22. He had probably kids my age or something. And so I go over to talk to J.O. and I'll never forget, because it was the first time I asked for money, he pulls out a check that he'd already pre-written. He slid it across the table at me. He said, well, here's what you came for. He says, now, Martin, he said, tell me about yourself. And I'll be forever grateful for him, because that was the best introduction, because he knew I was about to wet my drawers because I was scared to death, and I'm sitting in there, and the guy, 2 years later, he sold his company for like $200 million or something like that, and that was back in, this is back a long time ago when 200 million was like 200 million. Not that 200 million is not a big number now, but it is a big number. But that was so instructive to me. So as I've gotten older, I've tried to kind of return that favor to whomever, because I get a lot of young people will call and say, hey, we need this donation or that, and you know what? I'll predetermine whether I'm going to help them or not based off of whatever it is they're asking for, and then I'll do what J.O. did for me. So, yeah. So I learned a lot. Yeah, it's a good ministry. Yes, sir.
You talk about Hub being very acquisitive,
Mhm.
and just from your experience of being on the opposite side of that, what were some of the key factors that led you to choosing Hub International over the other firms such as Bulldog and Gallagher?
You know what's funny is I didn't know a thing about Hub when they called us. I mean, I knew the name, and obviously I'd seen him going up the leaderboard. Business Insurance every year ranks it, and Hub was just like going straight up. And but they had bought a local shop. Actually, they bought a shop in Albuquerque that had bought a little local thing in El Paso, and I didn't think that much of that operation. So my opinion of Hub wasn't very good, because in my mind, this is again a mistake. To your earlier question about mistakes, here's a mistake. Sometimes I can rush to judgment too fast, which is kind of dumb, but we all do it. And it's something you need to actually put the brakes on, tap the brakes, and back up a little bit. So my first thing was, nah, I'm not going to talk to these people. I don't respect this operation here. Why would I talk to them? Well, I finally said, okay, yeah, I'll talk to them. And when I talked to them, what I found out about, I absolutely loved them, because they were people-centric, entrepreneurial, and they were localized in their approach to running the business. So it wasn't from the corporate top-down type deal. So if you look at our operation, we do $3.5 billion in revenue. So we're not exactly small fries, but we have a very compressed org chart. So we have a corporate CEO, we have 4 super regionals, and then we have 25 people like me. That's it. So we sit, twice a month, we have CEO calls. He calls them president's calls, because he's having calls, and there's 4 of us on a call, so we're talking with Mark, and Mark's wanting to know what's going on. I'm talking, like I've got a call with Mark here this afternoon, before the afternoon's out. And so I like that. The other thing I liked about Hub is everyone that I met was like me. They all had run an operation, that all had to make payroll, they've all sold insurance policies, they all had to service stuff. And some of the companies, the big ones, Marsh and Aon, not so much Gallagher, because Pat Gallagher at one point used to write insurance, but Marsh and Aon, some of those bigger ones, the people at the top are just pure financial guys. They're not insurance people. and you get a whole different flavor. You know, it's like when GM used to be in the old days, they used to have car guys that actually ran General Motors, and then they got into, you know, back in the 80s, people that were bean counters, and, you know, honestly, their products reflected bean counters. And, you know, so I think it was a big deal for me, for our management team to basically be people out of the field that, you know, they could sell insurance and they knew what to do with it. And when you sit in the room with them, they made better decisions about the business. Now, we have really good financial people, but those people are not calling the shots. So, I mean, no offense to anyone who's doing financial accounting and love it. Yes, sir.
You guys work with several insurance companies on behalf of your clients? So
Yes.
What makes one insurance company preferable to another?
Well, it's not the cheapest price, because the cheapest price often can get you in trouble. It's really the one, every insurance company has a distinct appetite. Some like small business, some like construction, some like, you know, habitational apartments or buildings. They all have their own kind of appetite. So what our role is to try to you know, solicit the customer, try to fully understand what the customer is trying to do with their business, how they're trying to position their business, and then what are the things they're wanting to do, and then how do we develop, basically we call it risk financing, which is how do you figure out how you want to pay for the claims, how are you going to finance the risk, the cost of that, and then match it up with the insurance company who most appropriately can help you execute that plan. So, you know, we've got a lot of business with the Travelers, just to name one. But Travelers only like certain things. And if I get Travelers out of their sweet spot and I try to force something on them, it won't be, number one, the terms won't be any good usually, and it's probably not going to be very attractive pricing. So it's really, you've got to try to find the one who can deliver the most appropriate risk financing mechanism for your client base. And you should be doing it, and should be, some don't, but you should be doing it to where it's whatever's best for the clients, because some insurance companies have higher commissions than others. And that really should be a secondary issue. You know, now, it's easy for me to say that as I stand here, but for 30 years I sold business, and that's the way we always sold it. And that's really our focus is we, you know, you've got to make sure you're acting as the fiduciary for that client. So the last thing I need to do is say, hey, let me do business with this guy over here, brand X. He might not be the best guy, but he's going to pay me another 5 points on the backside. So I've always had, this is a whole nother conversation, but I always hated the way we were paid in the industry, because it creates immediate distrust with your client base. You can ask any businessman what he pays his attorney. You can ask him what he pays his accountant. You can ask him what he pays any of his key service providers, but not a one of them, unless they're a really big company and they're on a fee basis, not a one of them can figure out what we get paid. So as a result, the client never feels like you're on the same side of the table with them, which is to me a real fallacy. So my view of the world was, I always liked to share commission information. I was open kimono, because if they knew, you know, what I was making, oftentimes they thought we made more than we made, which is problematic too. You know, they thought we'd get 20% of some deal, when no, we're getting 10 points or 5 points or whatever it is. So that's really, it's a truly fascinating business. I went from being yuck, this is awful, to be, I absolutely love the business. Obviously I'm still doing it after all these years, but it's fascinating. The great thing about it, not only is it fascinating, but you get to do something good for people. Think about it. If there was no such thing as a property and casualty insurance company, no one would lend anybody any money. No bank would, because they couldn't collateralize anything in the event of loss. If, you know, who would be a risk taker with their employee population? What happens if you had no health insurance and someone has a massive heart attack and it's a $100,000 bill? What are you gonna do, just let them die? You know, how are you gonna pay for that? So really, if you look at it, the commercial insurance market in particular is the background, that cog that allows the economy as a whole to run. It allows businesses to make acquisitions. It allows the companies that you look at, when you look at their balance sheet, you can look at their balance sheet with some amount of confidence because you know that they have maybe, directors and officers coverage, or they've got this covered, or they've got that covered. So if something happens, you're not going to see their P&L go, So it's really a really important part of the economic fiber of business. Excuse me.
You're interested in going into various industries. As somebody who's both hired and fired individuals, what are some of the key characteristics you look when going to take on a new person?
Back to the people. I'm telling my youngest daughter right now, she's driving me bananas. She's wanting to work in the museum or art auction world, and she's in round 3 with Sotheby's in New York. First off, I don't want her to be in New York, but that's a whole nother story. And she's my sweetie that she's not very aware of things, around her. And I'm like, oh, that's a bad place for you to be. My oldest is pretty situationally aware. My youngest is clueless. But I've been telling her this because she kind of cracks me up. She wants to get all structured, and I'm not going, baby, that person over there wants to know, can you think? Can you string a sentence together? Can you communicate? They're trying to look at the soft skills because they know that they will teach you what they need to teach you to do that job they're hiring you for. And that's pretty much with any industry, with the exception of something, let's say you're going to be a physician or something really specific like an engineer or something like that. You need additional education there that is different. But I keep telling my daughter, we had this conversation not even 2 days ago. And so she was wanting me to do a role play with her because she was having interview 3 with someone in New York at Sotheby's. So I said, okay. So we go through interview number 3 thing. And she had I said, baby, you sound too stuffy. I said, don't read that crap off that paper. I said, just be Brooke. I said, man, Brooke is great. I love Brooke. And that person on the other end in New York is going to love Brooke too. But you got to let them see Brooke. So yes, you have to show the things that you've accomplished on your resume, but I guarantee you, if someone's like me, I'm looking to hire. It's like the athlete. I'm looking for the athlete. I'll figure out the position for you, but I'm looking for the athlete. Who's the one that can think critically? Who can communicate back and forth? No offense, any of y'all, but most of y'all can't even write a sentence really well. Okay, sorry about that. I'm sorry with Dave. Dave's laughing. But I see the text and crap that my kids send around and all their friends. And I'm like going, what happened to, business writing skills? It's a different thing. The biggest thing we have to do with our young producers when they come in, they'll tell me, well, I made contact with them, Martin. Well, how'd you contact them? Well, I sent them a text. Okay, you can send your buddies or people your age text, but remember you're selling somebody who's 50. They might not want to be sold via text. So you got to kind of remember who you're talking to. That goes back to, again, having enough range of people you spend time with to understand what people you spend time with in those ranges, what they like and don't like. So I would say just that's what I'm looking for. And when I see that, man, it's golden and we want to hire them. And so when we fire people, typically it's because they have either been a bad actor, they've done something inappropriate against policy or to another person, they've done something like that in the office, or a performance issue, and so that's typically when you have to fire someone, it's usually over that. I hate firing people. It's my most unfavorite thing to do. I always tell people that if you ever get accustomed to firing people, you need to get out of the business because that's not right. Even if the person deserves to be separated from the company because of what they did, you shouldn't want to do it. It's nothing that you take any pleasure in. So, yes, you next. Sorry.
So I had another question. You touched a little bit on technology and how it's evolved since you started. So you said mentioned it's all paper before.
Yeah, it's all paper, man. Lots of trees.
Yeah. So I was just wondering what role technology plays in your business now, and looking back over your 40 years of working, how it's evolved, and how you've seen it evolve.
Technology is probably one of those things that has been slow coming to insurance for a couple of big reasons. Number one, antitrust and anti-trade issues. So insurance is not regulated federally at all. Regulation is state by state. So each state has their own state board of insurance. Each state makes up their own licensing. Each state has their own everything. So one of the things is you've got the insurance company, you've got the broker, and so there's issues with collusion. So the basic thing is, historically, technology hasn't worked well in the industry because you've got regulatory issues and barriers, or it already would have been regulated. I mean, it already would have happened now. What's slowly happening, and we just made an announcement a couple of days ago, so y'all may or may not have seen this. We acquired a digital broker called Insurion. And so what we know is that you guys, age group and up, there's a middle group that you want to communicate with us differently than the guy who's 40, 50, 60. And so we've got to be prepared to communicate in that fashion. And so rather than try to create something from scratch, it's easier for us to go out and find best in class and buy it and just pay whatever we need to do to get it in. So we are actually rolling out a fully digital aspect of our business in the next quarter. And we've actually got a little name for it. It's not going to be Hub, but it's going to be something else, a Hub company. And so we'll be approaching the marketplace. We're going to try it first on the transactional business. So it's a huge deal. I'm not going to say it's a disruptor, because it's really not a disruptor totally, because people that are buying commercial insurance really want and need someone to sit down with them and slog through the financials and what's happening. But it is different, and it's going to be, it gets back to who owns the customer. So, if we let the insurance companies do this, then they're going to own the customer. So we're going to move out and we're going to do it first. So we own the customer. I know that sounds kind of interesting, but it's an odd deal. The insurance companies don't have a sales force, but they can sure the heck automate. And by automating, if we're not careful, they can cut us out of the cycle.
So if you had to quantify that, like how much is like done new way digitally versus like traditional like paper?
It's going to be just a fraction of the business, probably only 5 or 10% of the business initially.
Digital?
Yeah, just because it really, there's too many choices. There's too many options. You can't create a platform that does all that. Y'all have probably seen the commercial. It's on some of the streaming services. It's called, I think it's called three page or 3-line policy or something. And this guy's riding a desk through a burning building, and he's moving this desk. And basically what it is, that they've come up with an insurance contract that has, I think, 3 pages, and basically everything's covered except for what's not, and they specifically say what's not. And they're trying to get that to where you can digitize that and put it on to where it's easy, because there's too many choices on the commercial side. So what's going to happen, the transactional piece that can be moved into the digital market the easiest is going to be like personal lines, personal insurance, homeowners, and car and auto, because there's only a handful of things there to make choices on. But it's a big deal in the marketplace. And it's also going to be interesting to see what the regulators do to us, because the regulators aren't going to like it, because they're going to say, in order for this to work, we're going to have to be in collusion with, we got to have conversations with our carriers, and then that means, we have inclusion. Are we colluding with them on price fixing? And you get all, there's a whole host of things on that. So it'll be very interesting to see where this goes. Yes, sir.
Well, we talked about acquisitions today, and something that was really important is a company's culture.
Mm-hmm.
So I wanted to ask you, what's a culture trait that you like to see in companies, and how do you evaluate something like a company's culture?
That's hard. It's the thing I like to see in enterprise. You hear this. You hear there's a lot of buzzwords that you hear in school, business schools, and different things. And you use the learning organization, and you've got the borderless organization. You've got all these things. At the end of the day, basically the thing I like about a company, I like one that is entrepreneurial in nature, that can and has demonstrably replicated itself through organic growth, and they know that it's a sales company. A lot of people think because you're a sales organization, that's a 4-letter word, and it's a bad word. But I got news for you. If you hadn't figured it out already, everybody is selling. I don't care if you're a lawyer or whatever, you're selling your services, everyone is selling something. And so the ones that get it and know they're selling something, they're cool with that, and they're delivering an honest service, that's a big deal. It's hard to find those operations. And then really, you want an environment where people are allowed to make mistakes, and as long as they raise their hand and they own the mistake and you can fix them. What you don't want is an environment where the management team has made it to where if you make a mistake, it's like off with their head. People have got to have, business is a high impact sport. Things happen in business. So what you don't want bad actors in your operation. You want to weed that out. But if someone makes a mistake and they raise their hand and say, hey, I need help with this, you want to be able to have one where you help them, and you get the fix, and you create a learning. Now, if someone keeps making the same mistakes over and over, that's a whole different issue. Those people, you got to say, okay, now I'm going to maybe terminate you or put you on a PIP, performance improvement plan or something. But yeah, the culture is a big deal, and it's not something that comes on a 3-ring binder either. It's it's like those of y'all that y'all saw. I go to Starbucks every morning. There's a Starbucks a block from my house, and I walk over there and I get a Starbucks. And as much as anything, there's 2 other coffee shops kind of in the area. But the reason I go to that Starbucks is because Jan's the manager, and Jan's always there. When I walk in the door, Jan always says, "Hi, Martin, how you doing?" And I can go up there and I can get my Starbucks, and the barista guy with sitting back there knows my order, and he just has it going. And so I tap my card and go through there, and I tell them all hello, and I have a good time. And so the culture in that store is one of, they recognize me, they know who I am. It's like the old Cheers thing, everybody knows who you are thing. That's important. And so when you get that in a business, you can see it and you can feel it. That's the business you want. So, Dave, when am I supposed to stop?
Whenever you want.
Okay, you first, and I saw somebody over here. Was it you? Okay.
You can go first, 'cause I've asked a lot.
You go first. You're prettier anyway. He's pretty ugly. Sorry, Santi. Sorry. Sorry.
We're all coming down with it.
Go ahead.
I'm really interested. You have what I can was exhibited as a people-centric philosophy. I think that's very awesome. From what I can tell, it looks like that's to a lot of success. But I would like to know how that helps you with your employee retention.
Actually, you know what? During the pandemic, it came out really clearly. It's very helpful, because I think most of the people I work with know I genuinely do like them and care. And there are times when it doesn't matter. There are times when as the guy running the shop or the lady running the shop, whomever, you're going to have to make, you've got to make decisions. And sometimes those decisions, they're the right thing for the business. And you've got to balance that between what's right for the business and the individual and how does that look. And sometimes there's stress points there. And if the people that you work with trust you and feel like that, they know that when something happens, that it truly is the last resort, if it's not the preferred one, it's like you have a glass of attaboy good shits, and they might pull in there and pull a few of those out, but you've got enough in there from other experiences you had with them that they'll go with you. If you're a horse's rear and you don't really care about the people and you act like they're gum on the bottom of your shoe, they know it. I mean, your employees know stuff. And a lot of people I find that people that lord over people, it's not a very productive way to run any business or any relationship. Think about any relationship. If there's an unequal power leverage in any relationship and it gets torqued a lot, then that relationship, in most people's eyes, isn't worth continuing. So it's really something that's important. I think it's one of the things that's missing today. I've told people, when I look at the last 24 months, there's an alarming loss of civility. I mean, it is alarming where people are, I think a lot of it is social media. Because just because there's a social media platform out there doesn't mean that you can, you ought to say what's in your mind. Some of the people are just saying stuff, and when you read it, it's thinking like, holy crap. Like, I live in a really nice part of Dallas area, and there's a group that are on, they call it the Park Cities Chatter, and my wife will, from time to time, I'm not on social media, not because I'm old, but because frankly, it really makes me angry because people say things on there they should not say. And it's like they think because they're not looking at you, they can say something about you and they can write it down and it's okay. And it's not okay. And so that, more than anything, has created this alarming lack of civility. And you've seen that, it's spilled into everything. I mean, look at our political system right now. I mean, it's either far right or far left. There's really no one's in the center. I mean, there are people in the center, but they're not saying anything. And then people aren't governing right now. They just scream at each other. So, I look at that, and so I think the people side of things is huge, and it pays dividends. One of the things that came out for me at the beginning of the pandemic, because I was kind of paranoid about, how am I going to stay connected with all of our people? And before, I was in the offices once or twice a month in every office, man. So I'd go through, everyone knew me, and I'd buy lunches for people. I'd stay engaged with people. Hey, how you doing? You got a baby now, or how's the baby? And whatever, so you had a relationship. So I was sitting there trying to figure out how to do it. And this is one of those where I'm trying to, I needed a place to hang my hook. And it dawned on me, I'm not a very good writer naturally. I'm just not. I can do it, but I don't like it, and I'm not that good with it. So the hook that I had was one way to stay in front of everybody would be, I was gonna, every morning at the very beginning of the day, I was gonna write a short email on something to everybody, all company-wide. And it was nothing, it would be something like, one of them was, man, when I was 10 years old, I really wanted this bicycle, red bike. And I had found a picture of me on that little red bike, and I talked about various aspects of that. And so what it did is it allowed me to connect with people. And I got like, the first email I got must have like 100 emails back from people saying, that was a great story. Thank you for telling it. We really, thank you for just the leadership. Thank you. All I was doing was just telling a story. And so I just told stories for like a month and a half straight every morning. And it was really weird. I got up and I could pound out a story. And as time went on, I got more and more people communicating back. And then we opened up a WhatsApp thing, and we would leave it open by like location. So El Paso office or Dallas or one of the 2 Dallas offices, and people would come on the WhatsApp and they'd say, hey, such is down today, Citrix is down, or oh, hey, look at this snow picture, or whatever it was. People were just communicating in this virtual environment we were having to work in. And so it paid off. And so our operation, we were able to stay connected. And what's been kind of cool is we ended up with all these little WhatsApps where everyone's kind of connected, and they share pictures, and someone had a problem, and when we had the power went out in Dallas, and people volunteered to take them food, and so people went over and were delivering food, and these are employees that didn't have to do that, but so what happens is you have people being civil to one another, and because of that, you develop a relationship, you develop trust, and your team can continue to perform. Last year, we had our best year ever in Hub, Texas. We had 11% organic growth, which was just off the charts. We acquired, $57 million in new revenue. We added 300 people to our operation, and it all worked in this weird hybrid environment. And I think it was because of the connectivity. So that's a very good question. Yes, sir. Not as pretty as her, but go ahead.
Yeah, but as a finance major, I've been interested in insurance for a while, but I've never really known what the best way to go about it is, especially because as an undergrad student, maybe here at TOU, but the coursework is similar everywhere, they don't teach you the ins and outs of insurance, at least from my experience. So I was going to ask you, what sort of path would you recommend going on if you want to learn about insurance? And the second part was a little bit of a follow towards Isam's question about regulation, because you talk about acquisitions and how that can sort of become an antitrust area. So I just wanted to see what you thought about maybe some changes that have been made in the regulatory environment and how you see that affecting the business.
Yeah, the first one, I would encourage you to look for internships at a brokerage firm or an insurance company. The companies aren't doing very many internships anymore. I don't know why, but they're not spending. I think it's just a cost thing. But like we have at Hub, we have relationships with several schools that have insurance majors. So for example, UNT in Denton, UTD in Dallas, SMU. In El Paso, it's New Mexico State, which is right up the road. In Houston, it's University of Houston downtown. And so what we do is we actually actively solicit at University of Texas. We've got a big operation in Austin. We actually solicit internships and does a couple of things. It gets people, gives them a glimpse of the industry. And if we like them, then we can track them and try to obviously engage them in employment. The other thing it does, it gives people an opportunity to see what the business is like. So I would encourage you to look at an internship with someone. And I don't know. I know we have them at Hub. I don't know about Marsh and Aon. I think Lockton has some. I'm not sure who all has them, but you could probably go on the websites and see what internship opportunities are. So I know that we, like in Fort Worth, we have one with TCU. TCU does not have a major, they've got a minor. Baylor's got a major. So it's kind of interesting, most of the majors fall under finance. So that's what I would do there. On the regulatory side, it's been pretty static for my whole career. It's really weird. It's an area where there's been off and on pushes to do federal regulation and like get one universal license, and frankly that would be so much easier in so many ways. Like right now, I have to be licensed in all 50 states to conduct insurance transactions in all 50 states. So you can only be a resident agent in one state, and then the rest of them you're a non-resident agent, but you're having to manage all the, we have two people, all they do is do licensing in Texas. So you're paying, someone $70,000 a year to make sure everyone's licensed properly. Then each part of the business has to be licensed separately, and it's just a pain in the butt. So the licensing and that requirement is really, that would be a nice thing to fix, but the states don't want to give up control. And so it becomes one of those states' rights issue, and every state has a huge insurance department that's made up of 500,000-600,000 people, and none of them want to give that up. And no one really wants the federal people to do it, although I wish there was some reciprocity or some common license, because it is not only a frictional cost for us, but it's a pain, because now, once you've been in the business 20 years, in Texas you don't have to do continuing ed, but other states, you have to do continuing education. So you're managing continuing education in all 50 states, that gets old quick. And so what we've done at Hub is we've narrowed it down, because the cost of licensing everybody in every state, everyone's licensed appropriately in Texas, but like I'm the only person, there's 3 of us in Hub, Texas, that they use all the licenses, and I'm one of the 3, so I'm always getting all the stuff. So I tell my assistant, man, keep this stuff away from me here, keep me licensed. And so it would be nice, but yeah, it's an issue.
Yeah. One last question. Who wants to fire? Last question? Beyonce?
So last one, I would like to know, in your introduction, you said that before you decided to sell to Hub, that you would have to make a decision to sell it all, and that you would get back to that. So
Yeah.
what led to the decision to sell it all?
Ooh, good question. What led me to that decision was we were internally perpetuating. So we had agreed to buy out the guy that brought us in the business, 3 of us did, and we already had a formula. The business was valued each year, and we had a formal buy-sell arrangement, and it was funded in that we had life insurance and disability insurance, and then so if something happened to one of us, we we had money to make good on that. And so we were continuing that same process, and we were bringing in a younger group. We had sold 5% to this younger cadre. And then we were going to make available to them another 10%. And then over the next X number of years, then we would carve out tranches that way. The idea is basically we had Chase Bank set up financing. Everyone would get notes externally, so we didn't have debt within the company. The individuals had debt, which is kind of what happened. That's how I came through with just the debt. And then what we'd do is we'd make sure we ran the company to where it threw off enough cash that they could make their note payments. So it became kind of a circular process. So what was happening is when we were looking at our pro formas, we'd gotten large enough that it took, and we had, as we got larger, then to buy the company was a bigger problem. It was worth more. So what used to be a one-on-one situation where you had one partner retire out and you had one partner come in to buy him, the leverage actually had to be 3-to-1, and it was soon to be 4-to-1, meaning we had to have 4 younger ones to come in just to buy my shares. And so then you have to spend so much to try to bring in the younger ones over here, knowing that it took 3 to 5 years to get them to a point to where they could start being really productive. So then you had annually sunk cost of about $400,000+ a year doing this. Over here, you had to run the company at about a 28 to 30 EBITDA at a minimum to throw off enough cash to get money over here. And we were looking at it and we're thinking, you know what? It's going to be more and more challenging as we go down the road. So you're going to have to start making decisions. Do you hire less people? Then that kind of puts a kink in the perpetuation cycle. Or what do you do? Maybe make less shares available, but then that keeps you from people from wanting to come in because they're wanting to come in to have the opportunity to have the shares going forward. So that was kind of what we were looking at. Then what added color to it is 2 of the people we made available opportunity declined and didn't want to do it. And so I was sitting there thinking, you know what? I told our other shareholders, 2 guys, and I said, guys, you know what? These people behind us have got to want this as bad as we want it, or else this isn't going to work, because what's going to happen is we're going to be relying on them to pay us off over a 10-year period. What happens if they don't want to do that? And so that was kind of a point where it's really interesting when we had 2 people say, no, we don't think we want to do that. And you know what it is maybe their spouses wanted a new house, or their kids now wanted to go to private school, whatever, but they didn't want to divert the cash to buy the business. So at that point, then it's like, we need to do something different. So.
Why don't we give Martin a big
So,
round of applause?
Thank y'all. It's been a pleasure. Thank you for being so kind today.
So before everybody leaves, let's get a picture with Martin. Martin, one last thing.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
In honor of you being here today, top performers in our program are going to receive the Martin Young Scholarship next semester.
Ah.
Thank you for being here.
You're very welcome. You're very
Who wants to
welcome.
take a picture? Nate, thank you.